Chapter 7. Walker leant his elbow on the door card, and the transporter's electric window rolled up with a soft thud. Across the road, a Vietnamese restaurant was preparing for lunch, and the smell of beef shin and cardamom had been floating through the interior of the van for the last 10 minutes. It had started out pleasant, a welcome distraction for Walker from the constant jiggling of Michael's right leg, but the aroma had slowly turned sickly. They were parked on the A10, one of the last great roads of London. Roman in origin, it was long and straight and started outside Monument Station in the city, headed due north through Cambridge, then finished at King's Lynn, a pretty coastal town that got above 18 degrees when it felt like it. Walker and Michael were a long way from the sea. Illegally parked in a loading bay near Dalston Junction, the closest they were to anything wet was an Irish bar on the corner. Both men could have done with a skimful. They sat in silence, the only noise the shuffle of denim on upholstery as Michael's leg tapped out a techno beat. In 10 minutes, some bad men were expecting to be given £80,000. They didn't have a penny. 2 hours prior, under the shadow of the Tate, Walker had released Carter's coat and gotten hold of his anger. Sitting the skinny man down on the bench, Walker began making calls. One to his bank, requesting funds be made available in preparation for a significant withdrawal of cash. Yes, he knew he had to wait 24 hours, and no, he didn't want to speak to an advisor. One to the agent of a Premier League footballer, cancelling a meeting. Yes, we can rearrange for next week, and no, don't tell me that over the phone. And then finally one to his dog sitter, telling her to keep hold of Frank. Walker led the way back up the river, pushing the other man for information on the Turks. Michael had been put in touch with them 3 months ago through a friend from the bookies, originally borrowing £14,000. As insurance on the loan, he'd handed over his and his daughter's passports. He had paid them back within the 7 days and with interest. 100% interest, to be exact. Double the amount borrowed was the amount owed, and these terms hadn't bothered Michael. The week had gone well. Monday and Tuesday were quiet, but on Wednesday he'd struck gold. A young horse he'd been following had quietly made the step up from 2 miles to 3, and Michael managed to get him at 25-1. It comfortably won the 320 at Taunton and made Michael rich enough to have spare trouser money after he'd handed over 28k. The rate of interest didn't bother Michael. He knew from experience that so-called legitimate payday loan companies with adverts on the telly charged 10 times that. In his mind, he was getting a good deal. 6 weeks later, he went back to them for more. Coming off a bad run, Michael needed a boost, a shot in the arm, a fortune changer, a real balls-to-the-wall wager. Problem was, he was a touch light. Could he look at taking 25,000 this time? Sure, not a problem. Mehmet, his contact, facilitated the loan. Passports were handed back over and hands reshaken. Mehmet didn't say why they wanted the passports, and Michael didn't ask. The next day, a man who looked like he ate babies for breakfast turned up at his flat pulling a travel case full of cash. Same arrangement. Pay back double. 7 days passed, and Michael paid back 50,000. An all-night, high-rolling blackjack session had done the heavy lifting. As Michael spoke, Walker thought. If they had more time, he could talk to people, do a deep dive on this Mehmet, shake some trees and see what tumbled. As it was, Michael had put him in a situation in which he had no control over. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. It was now 1:30. 90 minutes wasn't long enough to find out any information about these people, gain any sort of advantage. It was the street equivalent of stepping into a boxing match at short notice. So-and-so broke their hand sparring. Have you got 8 rounds in you? Oh, no, it's okay. Just stay up for 5. Okay, 4. What, the fight? Yeah, it's Friday. Oh, you'll be fine. Hey, you never know, kid. You might catch him on the way in. Walker never did, but at least he got paid. This was the opposite. They were going to lose, and he was forking out for the pleasure. Fucking crap tipped me over. I couldn't roll a 7 for love nor money. Michael was still talking. Walker tuned back in. So I went to see him last week. Go on. Michael went on. The Turks welcomed him with open arms, their very best customer. Would he like to come for dinner? What about a woman? Mehmet knew the owner of a disreputable gentleman's club in Shoreditch. He'd compass, a private booth, and more titties than a menagerie. Michael said thank you for the offer, but could he please just borrow £40,000? Mehmet's brow had furrowed. The ends of his black moustache twitched. Carter watched him grind a half-smoked cigarette into an ashtray full of friends and rise from his desk, walk reluctantly to the back of the room, and tap quietly on an office door. After an awkward 30 seconds, it was opened, and Mehmet slipped inside, leaving Michael alone with the baby-eater. He watched him with the same interest that lions show crows. Minutes passed, and Michael prayed hard and deep to every gambling god he knew, and some he'd just made up on the spot. They answered. The door creaked open, and Mehmet returned, wheeling the travel case. His moustache touched the tip of his nose as he smiled. Michael handed over the passports, and the deal was done. Ever any paper? No. Stuff to sign? Documents? No. Where's the travel case? In my flat. How does it work, usually, the repayment? I turn up with double the money, we shake hands, and I get the passports back. Now, be more specific. How many men are there? Where does he keep the passports? What, in the back office? They were coming up to the multi-story at Southwark. Any weapons? Weapons? Yeah, knives, guns, things that hurt people. No, Michael was shaking his head more than was necessary. No, I don't think so. Don't think, no. Fuck's sake, Walker, no, I ain't seen no weapons. The clock on the dash read 14:55. Walker stepped out of the transporter, the soles of his heavy boots crunching the pavement. Michael slowly followed suit. They were on the Kingsland Road section of the A10. It was busy. Pedestrians danced round slow-moving traffic. Dalston had come up fast. A decade ago, Walker knew it as a place to avoid. Now it was a place to seek. The change to the area had sprung from necessity. Out-of-town white 20-somethings needed cheap rent to pursue their dreams, and Dalston, with its backstory of knife crime and drugs, provided it. Bars, pubs, and clubs had been the first to benefit from the influx, cashing in on their shiny new clientele and morphing into gastro, bistro, guest list joints that served hoppy beer for $6.50 a pop. Then the restaurant scene got its piece of the colonial pie. Existing eateries that had ticked along for decades realized they could put their prices up 50%, and the dreamers would still leave a tip. Covers paved the way for a whole collection of new tavernas to be opened by any Tom, Dick and Hassan who had ever tasted tahini. They popped up 3 a month, taking over unloved banks and disused corner shops, turning them into engineered wood-filled eating houses with upturned troughs for seating. Finally, it was the turn of the hoteliers. Walker had had a meeting with a top-flight footballer at Shoreditch House in the summer, and from the length of the queue for the rooftop pool, he knew they'd just about stay afloat. Let's go, Mike. They walked up the Kingsland Road in silence, side by side, Michael dragging his heels. Walker felt like a dad who'd been called in to see the headmaster. He watched Carter from the corner of his eye, half expecting him to bolt. This is it. You always go in the front? They had stopped on the high street, facing a pair of glass doors that looked like they hadn't seen polish this century. An open sign dangled at eyeline, and the store windows were filled with some faded posters screaming "Sale" at passers-by. Walker took a step back. Kingsland Carpets, established 1977, read the sign. The shop was large, the ground floor stretching below several net-curtained windows with crumbling sills. On its left sat a kebab shop, and on its right a barber's, packed with swarthy youths sporting the same haircut. Walker noticed an overweight man in a greasy apron running two chef's knives together in the reflection of the takeaway door, the sharp noise of steel on steel spilling out into the street. Michael looked pale. Walker nodded for him to open the door and hoped that was the last time they'd see any blades today. They entered the store to be greeted by a man holding a Stanley knife. Michael stopped dead. Walker pulled the door shut and in the same motion quickly slipped round the stationary Carter. The knife wielder was small and wore Snickers work trousers 2 sizes too big with pockets for knee pads. He stared dully at Walker, hands loose at his side, blade fully exposed. Walker stared back. Slowly, the man retracted the knife, sunk to his knees, and began to roll up a freshly cut piece of carpet that lay at his feet like a body. "Good afternoon." A bald man was walking towards them. His shirt was grey and tired, and he had eyebrows that held hands. "Can I help?" It was a procedural question. From the strained look on his face, he knew that the 2 men weren't there for something to go on the stairs. "We're here to see Mehmet." "Is he expecting you?" Eyebrows looked tired. "Yeah." Without another word, the bald man turned and went behind the shop counter, passing through a door that said "Staff Only" in blood-red letters. Walker moved further into the shop, Michael a step behind. In addition to Stanley, who was now busy cutting a fresh piece of carpet off a rack, he noticed 2 other men working at Kingsland Carpets. Both stood behind the counter, and both wore ties from the 90s. One was talking patiently into a phone, and the other had his head down, flicking through paperwork, trying his best to look busy. Walker wondered how much they knew. Probably all of it. "Come." Eyebrows had returned and was waving them through the door behind the counter. Walker let Michael reluctantly take the lead. They passed through into a small room that housed a kettle, a sink, and a cast-iron security door that looked like it had come straight from Midnight Express. It was a matte copper colour and stood twice the width of Walker. Above it and to its sides, huge metal girders served as its frame. Eyebrows quietly closed the staff-only door behind them, and the carpet shop disappeared. The 3 men were almost on top of each other in the tight antechamber that smelled of bleach and coffee. A large cafetiere with half a cup still inside was sitting on the dishboard, winking at Walker. He placed his palm on the glass to check the temperature, then poured its remnants into a mug and threw it down his throat. It was good and thick and made Walker's brain tingle. Eyebrows, lips quivered, but he said nothing. Walker nudged Michael, who looked at the floor. 20 years ago, they were doing the exact same thing outside the headmaster's office. There was the sound of bolts grating before the low screech of stiff hinges as the door swung slowly open. Eyebrows quickly disappeared into his carpet kingdom. A man with the build and demeanour of an Olympic weightlifter replaced him, and caused Michael to instinctively move back, pushing himself into a corner of the tight room. Walker held his ground. The strong man was short in the same way that boulders are short. He wore a bright, electric blue tracksuit whose jacket zipper seemed to have been forced down by his chest muscles. Clean-shaven and smelling of talc, his hairline was beating a hasty retreat from his face, and Walker didn't blame it. He reminded Walker of an Eastern Bloc corner man, one who had spent the majority of his 40-something years hurting people. "Face the wall." Blue Tracksuit's accent was as thick as the Bosphorus. Michael and Walker turned, and placed their palms on peeling wallpaper. The squat man patted them down like he was kneading bread. "Come." Walker was impressed. The carpet shop front seemed legitimate, and security was thorough. He imagined the antechamber had been built purposefully small to allow Blue Tracksuit to get up close and personal. The squat man had been created to dominate on the inside, and he'd have no trouble crushing people in that small area. He was waiting for them now, arm outstretched in a come-through gesture. They obeyed, Michael first, Walker slightly behind. He felt Blue Tracksuit's eyes burning a hole in his nape as he stepped into the back room. They were in a large office that seemed like it had been one for a long time. Old-style computer towers sat on cheap desks whose veneer strips were peeling away to reveal the particle board below. Filing cabinets stood against one wall, their tops elucidated by grey light that struggled through a set of barred windows on the right-hand side of the room. Walker heard traffic filtering through a red brick wall, the type that in any other office would be considered trendy. The room's main source of light came from cobweb tubes fixed to the partitioned ceiling. Not all of them worked. At the back of the room was another door, not metal, just standard plasterboard office. "Hello, Mehmet." Walker was surprised that Michael's voice was as level as it sounded. "Who is he?" "A friend." "Why did you bring him?" Michael hesitated. I'm sorry, I don't have the money." Behind them, the heavy security door groaned shut. Walker turned and watched Blue Tracksuit slide 3 heavy bolts across the frame. The man called Mehmet let out a sigh. He wore a slim fit, sapphire blue blazer, a grey designer t-shirt, faded sky blue jeans with intentional holes in the thighs, and expensive-looking black loafers. His beard and hair were the same length and ran into one another seamlessly. He reminded Walker of a 15-year-old trying on his father's clothes. The air was thick with Brill cream and cigarettes. "How much do you have?" "Nothing, but I'll have it all tomorrow." "Why did you bring your friend?" Michael didn't know what to say. Moral support. At the sound of Walker's voice, 2 young men who were flanking Mehmet flinched. Both were no older than 20. Walker noticed he couldn't see their hands. Polyester rustled at his back, and Walker shifted slightly to bring Blue Tracksuit within his field of vision. "What's your name, friend?" Mehmet asked the question whilst lighting a cigarette. "Walker." "And why are you here?" Michael was concerned about your reaction to him not having the money. "So you are his bodyguard?" "No, a friend." Michael didn't need to be worried. Mehmet spoke as if Carter didn't exist. "We are just businessmen." Walker nodded towards the 2 men flanking Mehmet. "Businessmen who carry guns." Mehmet smiled. "Mr. Walker, we don't know you. Michael has never mentioned you, nor has he spoken to us about any concerns or issues he might have with regards to payments. He's been a reliable customer over several months who has always paid on time." Mehmet didn't look at Carter. "Today, however, he's come here without a bag, but with a stranger. A stranger who, if you'll excuse me for saying, looks a little rough." Walker heard Blue Tracksuit grunt behind him. "Mehmet, I'm sorry. Look, Walker's just a friend who's going to help me get the money together. I asked him to come along because, well, to tell you the truth, I was scared." "Mike, you don't need to be scared." There was a look of paternal disappointment etched into Emmett's face. "This is business. Late payments, they're part of it. Well, you think every loan we've ever given out has been repaid on time?" Well, no, of course not, Mehmet continued, his voice like feathers on a broken bottle. It's part and parcel of what we do. It's unfortunate, yes, for both parties, but at the end of the day, it's just business. What did you think? That you'd turn up today empty-handed and Olak here would break your legs? He gestured towards blue tracksuit. Well, actually, yeah. Michael now had a grin that matched Mehmet's. Walker saw his friend's shoulders drop an inch or 10. Of course not. Mike, we're not animals. We're in the money business, not the hurting people business. Walker's eyes flicked to blue tracksuit, who was picking his teeth with a fingernail. He reckoned that particular email went straight to the heavy's spam. You say your friend here is going to help you get the money. That's right. Can I ask how? A loan. That's generous of you. Walker said nothing. Mehmet took a drag on his cigarette, smoke joining silence to hang in the air. The two young men that flanked Mehmet rocked in their trainers. Walker hadn't seen their weapons, but he could tell from the stiffening of their shoulders they gripped them tighter when he was addressed. So, is that okay? Michael's voice crashed into the silence like a drunk in a classroom. I'll pay you back tomorrow. Mehmet ignored Michael. He turned to one of the men at his rear and spoke softly. The guard handed over a phone, allowing Walker a view of the pistol he carried. It looked real and heavy, but Walker was no expert. The only thing he knew about guns was that they killed people. Mehmet had placed a thin pair of reading glasses on the end of his nose and was tapping at the phone screen with one slender index finger. He swore, stopped to ask phone owner a question, swore again, and gave the touchscreen one more vicious poke. The device let out a whoosh noise, and he handed the phone back to its owner. Now, let's see what we can do. Mehmet placed himself behind one of the desks and gestured to the two chairs in front. Michael sat. Walker remained standing. His attention had shifted over Mehmet's shoulder, past the two gun-wielders to the back of the room. The cobwebbed strip lighting and the grey sun didn't reach that far, but through the murkiness Walker studied the closed office door. White, plain and cheap. A size 10, 3 inches inside the handle would crack it, so Walker knew it wasn't an exit. A bar of yellow light spilled out into the room from under it. Mehmet cleared his throat. He looked like a bank manager called into work on a weekend. The original amount you borrowed was £40,000, correct? Michael shuffled in his seat. Yeah. And you were due to pay us back £80,000 today. Yeah. Walker watched Michael pick at a hole in the armchair. You're looking to extend the date of repayment by 24 hours? That's right. A noise came from the office door. The bar of light under it broke. Walker glanced behind at blue tracksuit, who was leaning, back against the steel entrance, thick arms crossed. Mehmet sat back, causing caster wheels to squeak on worn carpet tiles. There was an open pack of Marlboro Reds on his desk, the front of which displayed a photograph of a woman with a hole where her throat used to be. Mehmet lit up and inhaled. Instead of a day, we can give you 3. Mehmet released the smoke as he spoke. Michael leaned forward and placed his hands on the desk. He bowed his head as if in prayer. Walker saw his knuckles turn white. Thank you. Thank you. Walker moved his back off the wall and stood next to Michael's chair. The two men behind Mehmet rocked in their shoes. One licked his lips. What's the catch? Catch? Pleasure moistened Mehmet's lips. Yeah, the catch. The new terms, whatever you want to call it. Mehmet shrugged. The usual. 100% interest, as Michael is aware. Michael's shoulders were up around his ears again. Walk, come on, man, it's fine. It's what we agreed. You see, we're not being unreasonable here, Mr. Walker. Silence had returned. Walker could sense blue tracksuit behind him. He had moved off the door and into the room. If trouble started, Walker knew guns would be fired as a last resort. The first response to any emergency in Kingsland carpets would be the ball of muscle at his back. He doubted there had ever been much need for a second. So, we're clear. Today's Wednesday. That means Michael has until Saturday to hand over £80,000. A phone buzzed in the pocket of one of the guards. He stepped forward and handed it to Mehmet. The Turk placed his cigarette on the edge of the tray and let the dead ash crumble. You're half right, Mr. Walker, studying the phone screen as he spoke. The loan has indeed been extended until the weekend. Michael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. But the amount owed is now £160,000. Michael flinched, like one of the youths had shot him. No, wait. He was back on the edge of his chair, fists clenched tight on the table. The agreement was I borrow 40 and pay back 80. Double. That's the terms. Every time I've borrowed from you, those were the terms. Double. Yes, but before you always paid on time. Yeah, I know, but listen. And the terms we set out originally, I know the terms, included any late payment would be subject to a further charge of another 100% on the amount repayable. Now, hold on a minute. What? I don't even know what that means. Oh, it's quite simple. Mehmet sat back in his chair, a loafered foot resting on the opposite knee. Walker didn't see socks. Mr. Walker understands, don't you, Mr. Walker? Mehmet's smile was as wide as the A10. Michael was on his feet. Listen, 80. He jabbed the desk with a finger like he was trying to skewer each syllable to the wood. 80,000. That's what I'm paying back. That's fair. Now, that's what we has agreed. You can't just fucking change the rules now. Walker's eyes had been drawn to the back of the room. The bar of bright light under the door there had been replaced by shadow. He hadn't noticed it before, but through the room's dusk he made out a hole the size of a penny in the direct centre of the door. A peephole. Walker frowned slightly. No, it couldn't be a peephole. The hole was level with the door handle. To look through it, you'd either have to be on your knees or a 9-year-old. Mehmet hadn't said anything, so Michael carried on. £160,000. Michael kept repeating the amount, but it didn't decrease. 100... Nah, it's too much. Way too fucking much. The agreement was 80. 80 is fair. 80 is right. Michael's voice yo-yoed between outrage and injustice. The sleeve of his coat flapped over Mehmet's desk, the fur-lined hood now halfway down his back. Mehmet sat calmly. His cigarette was done. He span the mobile phone gently between thumb and forefinger. Remember before you said you were worried about coming here today because you didn't have the money? Yes. And so, because of your fear, you brought along your friend to make you feel safe. I know you were concerned. I understand. But would you have done the same if you owed money to a bank? Because that is all we are. A bank with less red tape and more clarity. A bank that deals in round numbers, not decimals and APR. We're not unreasonable people. We're not violent people. We are serious people. We're not some shitty little street gang trying to inflate our egos through savagery, dealing out pain for reputation's sake, or as a punishment, or for the sake of a postcode. It's pointless, not worthwhile. The Turk paused. Do you know what business is, Michael? Michael shook his head. Walker wished Mehmet was closer so he could punch a hole through him and his rhetorical questions.
Business involves one party providing a service to another in exchange for money. Mehmet spoke like he was giving a TED talk. The mix of aftershave, hair gel and cigarette smoke was beginning to give Walker a headache. And to go back to my original point, if we were to hurt you or injure you in some way, that could make it more difficult for you to repay us, which we certainly don't want. His nicotine-stained teeth flashed yellow as he grinned. It would be jeopardizing our source of income, which is a big no-no in the business world. Look, I get it, but 160... Mehmet carried on as if Carter hadn't spoken. Walker knew what was coming, but he just didn't know how it was coming. How old is your daughter, Michael? Michael flinched like he'd been kicked in the groin. She's 12. Mehmet's head was down. He was looking at the mobile phone. She is tall for her age. The mobile slid across the desk on its back. The screen showed Hannah in school uniform, green socks pulled up onto her thighs, golden hair mid-bounce. She was crying. Leonie was next to her, face contorted in a shout. She looked about ready to kill the cameraman. They were surrounded by school children. Incentive, Michael. That's the key to running a successful business. Providing a service and then providing an incentive for the party to pay. He leaned over the desk and pointed at the screen. This is your incentive. Pay us what we ask by Saturday, or we don't break your legs. We break theirs.